20,000 flee the mayhem of East Aleppo, leaving the uncollected body bags of those killed whilst trying to escape. Good evening. Russia and Syria stand accused tonight of having combined to prevent civilians from escaping the bombardment of East Aleppo. Of the hundreds of thousands still in the city, a mere 20,000 have managed to get out in the last 48 hours. Tonight, we have the latest, and we speak with the head of the Norwegian effort to intervene in the disaster. Jan Egeland, himself a former Under-Secretary-General of the UN, tells us.
I mean, this is the blackest of chapters in UN history, in my view.
Also tonight, 3 days of mourning in Brazil as a plane carrying one of its football teams crashes in Colombia. These players were on their way to a top South American Cup final. Only 6 people survived the crash, believed to have been caused by an electrical fault. As temperatures plunge as low as -9, some 4 million households in Britain are struggling to afford heating. Campaigners say the problem won't be solved for decades. And could the Liberal Democrats cause an upset as they try to turn a by-election triggered by Heathrow expansion into a fight over Brexit? We catch up with the former Conservative MP, who now hopes to be re-elected as an independent.
And as Donald Trump names more figures in his top team.
Jared is a very successful real estate person, but I actually think he likes politics more than he likes real estate, I must tell you.
Could another be Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, come election strategist, who's become one of Trump's most influential advisors?
Mr. Kushner, you think you're going to get a job in the White House?
Have a good day. Thank you.
Are you going to get a job in the White House?
More than 20,000 people are estimated to have fled East Aleppo in the last 2 days as rebels battle to stop Syrian forces and their allies from advancing further into their territory, a key battleground of the 5-year civil war. Before the weekend, rebels held a large swathe of Syria's second city. After the intense regime onslaught, the territory has shrunk, pushing the front line south. Now the Red Cross is demanding safe passage for civilians desperately trying to leave. And a warning, there are distressing images from the very start of Diana Magnay's report.
Hear this. There is a grotesque symphony of the sounds of fear and suffering and despair. It is all here. I had a boy, I had a girl, this man says, as if to ask, where are they? Civil defence teams working to screams of grief in a street strewn with body bags. And the thud of another bomb.
They're using thermobaric bombs. They caused massive destruction and killed 3 families who were fleeing Shah and going to the western parts. 35 people died. You can see them here on the ground.
3 families fleeing districts threatened by Assad's forces, heading for the government-controlled west, hit by government bombs. 20,000 people have fled in the last 48 hours, many to the Kurdish areas, some to the government-controlled west. Those who've stayed behind as regime troops patrol victorious are treated as hostile.
We have received reports of opposition groups preventing civilians from leaving the areas under their control as well. There are also concerns at the same time that upon reaching the government or Kurdish-controlled areas, civilians who are perceived to have links or connections with armed groups may be detained.
But it's in the rebels' shrunken territory where the situation is worst, where the bombs rain down on people who have little left to eat and nowhere left to run to.
Now our neighborhoods are really crowded because people who ran away are now in our neighborhoods. And buildings which used to have 2 or 3 families now have 10. Now the regime is shelling us with barrel bombs, with artillery shelling.
Clearly, I cannot deny
this is a military acceleration. And I can't tell you how long eastern Aleppo will last.
With so many more now to add to Syria's displaced, France is calling for an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council. Though in nearly 6 years of war, there is a certain inevitability to Russia's veto, a certain resignation to international inaction.
We wonder, why do we have United Nations? Why do we have human rights laws? This has been a slow-motion train wreck, and this message is from the people who lasted in Aleppo to the world. Don't look back years from now and wish that you can do something. You can still do now.
There is now a certain inevitability to eastern Aleppo's fall. A major loss for the rebels and gain for Syria and its backers, Russia, Iran, Hezbollah, and a myriad of other Shia militias. A well-honed strategy of starving urban populations into submission with mass displacement of civilians working here as it has before.
Diana Maglin reporting. Well, now, a short time ago, I spoke to Jan Egeland. He was head of the UN's Task Force on Humanitarian Access in Syria, and asked what he believes is being done to remedy the situation for civilians in East Aleppo.
We do indeed hear a very major battle in the midst of a very densely populated city. At the moment, the people inside and the small groups who are inside have to cope for themselves, because we are prevented from entering the outside organizations, the UN and all of the others that do have supplies, do have stocks, do have trucks and aid workers outside. I was in contact with Russian diplomats and military today and yesterday. Our appeal is very clear. Let us have a pause. Let us enter East Aleppo with relief and allow us to evacuate the hundreds of wounded.
It seems very clear from the outside world that basically Syria and Russia are of one mind of this, and that is they're going through East Aleppo and they will clean it out, and whatever it costs, they'll just keep going.
Well, I cannot speculate in what their motives are, but my sense is that they do not want a slaughterhouse in East Aleppo.
Mr. Egeland, you have worked at the very heart of the United Nations. You know how it works. You know why it was set up the way it was set up. And yet that way is now failing desperately the people of Syria.
It is. It is. I mean, this is the blackest of chapters in UN history, in my view. Here we are, 119 nations, a full Security Council, and we're watching the slow death of this city, an ancient cradle of civilization. So, but again, let's not just lament how it is. We're not giving up. I'm not giving up.
When you say you've been talking to the Russians last night, I mean, are you talking to somebody that really has the clout at the very top that can talk to President Putin, for example? I mean, are you able in some way to pull the vital strings that would unleash this thing?
Well, what I use is the channels of the International Syria Support Group, ISSG. These, the military and diplomats there have access to the very top in Moscow, and of course Moscow is having a great say in Damascus. The messages are very clear, but clearly we are with two opposing sides. I mean, that side is talking about liberating a place from terrorists. The other side see this as a big power assisting a dictatorship in crushing a popular rebellion. The two sides are very, very much opposed. What we see is the civilian population in the crossfire.
Can you finally revive your communication tonight, for example? I mean, do you have any sense that they'll talk again?
I mean, I and many others talk with Russians and the UN team in Damascus with the Syrians. several times every day. We're now especially concerned with the evacuation of wounded. There are desperate pleas that hundreds of people are virtually bleeding to death. They need to get out. That can be easily organized if we get the pause in the fighting and if we get access through the front lines.
Jan Egeland, thank you very much indeed for talking with us. Thank you. Well, with us now is Karen van Hippel, a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of the State of the US State Department until last year and Director of the foreign policy think tank, the Royal United Services Institute, RUSI. Karen, the world is quite literally looking on helplessly. I mean, there are the Norwegians, they have aid convoys ready, there are people ready with aid all over the place, but they cannot get at the people.
Yeah, we've been watching this slow motion saga for too long. It's so tragic. And we've just been watching more and more people be slaughtered helplessly. Civilians are being slaughtered this entire time, and no one is taking the right moves to stop it.
But are the Russians in particular taking advantage of what is inevitably an interregnum, a lame duck presidency, in order basically to try and get the thing done by the inauguration?
I'm not sure about that. I think if Hillary Clinton had won, they might have accelerated the military activity. But given that Trump seems to be aligned with Putin, I'm not so sure they are in such a rush. I just think they're trying to finish it, probably for their own reasons, that they're not overextended, et cetera. But, you know, it would have been, I think it would have been a similar pace.
Well, at RUSI, are you working on what the implications of a Trump presidency is going to be, given that he appears to be Putin-favored?
Yeah, for now. I mean, we're all watching. We're all trying to come up with, you know, thought pieces, et cetera, to try to put some good ideas out there. I do think that he's a realist. Donald Trump is a realist, and I think he will listen to reason, and there will be some from his own party, from the Senate, John McCain, Lindsey Graham, Senator Bob Corker, who will
Most of whom he has abused in the past.
He has abused in the past, but they're also very powerful in the Senate, and they will be cozying up too much to Putin, so they will push back on many things, and I think he will listen to them. The question is, who else will he be surrounded by within his own cabinet, Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, et cetera? Those still haven't been chosen.
In the meantime, I mean, in a way, sadly, President Obama is himself now being criticized for really having got us to this position by having shown so little leadership on Syria.
Yeah, and you know, Obama didn't want to do more in Syria. He didn't want to create another Iraq debacle, really. But you also ignore a place like Syria at your peril. I mean, ignoring Syria and trying to contain it, well, it just isn't containable. We have ISIL because of the Syria conflict, and we also have the migration crisis throughout Europe because of the Syria conflict, which even contributed to Brexit in this country. So you really can't ignore these festering civil wars.
Do you agree that in looking at East Aleppo, it is inevitable it will fall? If it falls, that's not the end of the affair, is it?
No, that's not the end of the affair because, of course, the regime itself doesn't have the strength to hold on to it. So they will create a power vacuum that, if it's not filled by the Russians and the Iranians, which won't be popular, it could easily be filled by terrorist groups because the regime itself simply won't be able to hold on to it.
And the regime is incapable of actually administering the whole country. It's a vast country.
It's been weakened tremendously throughout the war. The only reason it's able to do what it has been doing is because of Russia and Iranian support. It would not have been able to do this on its own. And don't forget, the Russians intervened because the regime seemed to be collapsing last September.
Karen van Hippel, thank you very much indeed for talking with us. Fatima.
Thank you, John. And for a look at all of our reports from inside Aleppo, everyday life there, go to insidealeppo.com. Now, Brazil has begun 3 days of national mourning after a charter plane carrying one of its football teams crashed into the Colombian mountains, killing 75 people on board and leaving 6 survivors. The Chapecoense team were on their way to play in the finals of the South American Cup in Medellin when the plane went down after reporting electrical problems. Tributes have poured in from around the world, as Kieran Jenkins reports.
It seems impossible that anyone could have survived. Bodies are now lined up on this Colombian hillside. Footballers, backroom staff, journalists and crew. There are 75 dead. But from the wreckage, somehow 6 people were found alive. The squad of Chapecoense checked in at Sao Paulo airport, heading for the biggest game in the club's history. This is now their final team photo, taken outside the British Aerospace aircraft chartered especially for the journey. They'd set out with great anticipation. This video was posted by the defender, Felipe Mercado, now thought to be among the dead. Another video showed fullback Alan Rochelle with goalkeeper Danilo on the left. Danilo died of his injuries, but Rochelle was hurried to hospital and is now listed among 6 survivors, including teammates Neto and Jackson Fullman, a journalist and 3 members of the crew. 3 years ago, this team was playing in Brazil's second tier. 6 days ago, they won a place in the final of a prestigious South American competition. Not superstars, but unlikely heroes. Worshipped by their supporters, who today gathered at their stadium to pray. The flight took off from Sao Paulo at 3:35 p.m. local time. It stopped over in Bolivia, leaving again at 6:18 p.m. for Medellin in Colombia. At around 10 p.m, the plane declared an emergency. Contact was lost in the mountains about 30 miles from Medellin. Brazil's president declared 3 days of national mourning.
We found out in the early hours of this morning about this very sad event. Unfortunately, the only thing we can do is pray for the dead and support the families that are grieving now.
These were young men whose promise was cruelly cut short. It brings to mind 1958 and the Busby Babes, the Munich air crash in which 8 of Manchester United's golden generation died. Football mourned that loss, as it mourns today, a minute's silence at the training grounds of Barcelona and Real Madrid. Chapecoense have been denied their greatest moment and dealt their lowest instead. These players didn't make the journey. Of the club that Brazil fell in love with, they're almost all that's left.
Now, a few moments ago, I asked sports journalist Andrew Downey, who's based in Sao Paulo, what the impact of the crash would be on Chapecoense and its fans.
Well, we could see the impact in the moments after this news broke. Fans went down to the ground in Chapecó. They were there in their shirts, even though it was quite cool. They were there, they were holding hands, they all recited the Lord's Prayer together, still grasping onto a little bit of hope that some of the players might have survived, some of the journalists that were there might have survived. So it's obviously a huge event for them because it's a small town club and they were really looking forward to tomorrow's game.
And Chapecoense, what sort of team are they?
Well, the important thing about Chapecoense is that it's from a small town. It's a team that's really punched above its weight in the last few years. It came up to the first division in 2013, but in 2008 it was still in the fourth division, so it rose very quickly. It arrived in the first division, it's established itself, and it's done really well. And getting to the final of a tournament like the Copa Sudamericana was sensational for them.
So how will Chapecoense as a team be remembered?
Well, I think they'll be remembered for this fairy tale season. As I said, no one really expected them to get this far. If you imagine Chapecoense is a town with 200,000 people, this was a team that was taking on clubs from Sao Paulo, which has Greater Sao Paulo has 20 million people. Rio has more than 10 million people. This small-town club were taking on these teams, and they were matching them. They were duking out with them, and they did really well. And so that's what they'll be remembered for. And for getting to the final of the Copa Sudamericana, it's a great feat even to get this far.
So how much of an impact will this have on Brazilian football generally?
It's a major event because it's one of the biggest, sporting tragedies that Brazil has ever seen, and one of the biggest air tragedies that Colombia has seen for several decades. And I think that's where you're going to feel a lot of the major impact, and obviously particularly in Chapecó, where people, this was the hometown club, people supported them, and people were really excited by this great season and looking forward to this game on Wednesday night.
And Brazil has declared 3 days of mourning. What sort of form will that mourning take, do you think?
Well, I think more importantly than the 3 days of mourning is what the football authorities have done. They have cancelled all games that were supposed to take place this week. The Brazilian Cup final was supposed to take place tomorrow. That's been cancelled. And even more importantly, a very magnanimous gesture by the other clubs in the league. They've got together and they have asked the Brazilian Football Confederation to exempt Chapecoense from relegation for the next 3 years. So they're trying to do their little bit to help. They've also said, we will lend you players. We want to help you, get through the worst of this, get back on your feet. What they're looking at is at least to just survive the next 2 years, and then look 3, 4, 5 years ahead.
Andrew Downey, thanks very much for joining us.
From that tragedy to what's happening here, where the former football coach Barry Bennell has tonight been charged with 8 child sex offences against a young boy allegedly dating back more than 30 years. It comes as the Football Association begins its own inquiry into the growing claims of historical sex abuse in youth football, calling it the worst scandal in its history. Here's our sports correspondent, Kamian Zeram.
62-year-old Barry Bennell was a football coach with links to clubs across the Midlands and North West. He's been charged with sexually assaulting a 14-year-old boy between the years of 1981 and 1985. The CPS says it's the result of fresh evidence received from Cheshire Police back in September. But all of football is under the microscope about this and other allegations of historic child sex abuse. It emerged today that a 7th police force has launched a separate investigation after new claims received only this weekend, this time in Cambridgeshire, as the FA insisted its inquiry would leave no stone unturned, chaired by an independent QC with experience of child protection.
I think it's certainly the biggest one I can remember. I think the moral consequences of failing to deal with some of these issues in the past, we must get to the bottom of. We've got an inquiry led by an external QC who will make sure we know the facts.
While Parliament was told it's not just football, but other sports that might have been affected too.
Today, my honourable friend, the Minister for Sport, will write to all national governing bodies to ask them to redouble their efforts in protecting children that play their sports.
Barry Bennell will appear at South Cheshire Magistrates Court on December the 14th.
Kamian Zeram reporting. And in the last hour, the militant so-called Islamic State group has claimed it was behind yesterday's attack by a Somali immigrant on a university campus in the US state of Ohio. 20-year-old Abdul Razak Ali Artan injured 11 people when he ploughed into pedestrians at Ohio State University and stabbed others with a knife. He was shot dead by police when he failed to obey orders to stop.
Police have released CCTV footage of a terrifying road rage attack on the M62 in Eccles after a lorry and a pickup truck collided. The 2 men in orange had asked the driver of this pickup truck for his insurance details when he turned abusive. First, he reversed into their lorry. Then he tried to get inside the cab, grabbing a shovel and smashing the side window inches from the driver. Police are appealing for anyone with any information to get in touch.
The Chernobyl reactor in Ukraine, scene of the world's worst nuclear accident 30 years ago, has now been covered with an airtight shelter. The steel structure, completed after years of work at a cost of around £1.5 billion, was slowly pulled over the site over the past 4 days. It's designed to prevent any radiation leaks. The Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko paid tribute to the workers who'd built the original cover, despite dangerous levels of radiation. Now, British companies have been told they'll have to justify levels of executive pay under new consultation plans unveiled by the Business Secretary, Greg Clark. He said big firms would have to reveal the difference between the amount earned by chief executives compared to an average employee. But other promises, like putting workers on company boards, aren't part of the plan. Labour said the proposals would not have stopped the scandals at BHS and Sports Direct. Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, reports.
Theresa May put corporate governance and reform of the nation's boardrooms at the top of her agenda for government. The Prime Minister said the behaviour of BHS and Sports Direct bosses had helped to put it there. The government's consultative paper spells out how bosses have paid themselves ever more through relatively lean business years. In 1998, a chief exec in the top 100 UK firms was taking home the equivalent average earnings of 47 employees. Last year, the same chief execs were trousering the equivalent of 128 employees on average earnings. While FTSE 100 bosses' pay has been quadrupling from an average of £1 million in 1998 to more than £4 million now, the share index for those top 100 companies bobbed along, barely increasing at all over the whole period. To remedy all this, Theresa May has been promising big change.
I want to make shareholder votes on corporate pay not just advisory, but binding. So if you're a boss who earns a fortune but doesn't look after your staff, I'm putting you on warning. This can't go on anymore. A change has got to come, and this party is going to make it.
But today, the government announced those annual binding votes might not apply to all parts of a boss's pay package, might not apply to all companies. And this, a week after the Prime Minister climbed down on her own commitment to having employees and consumers represented on company boards. In Whitehall, they talk of an agonising and late climb down on these issues, and they talk of a pushback from employers' organisations, angry at the Prime Minister's rhetoric. There was real alarm in the business world, wasn't there, after that speech at conference that the Prime Minister gave, some of the stuff the Home Secretary said?
I think what we're hearing now is welcome. It's pro-enterprise. That's what we needed to hear as business.
You've been beating down the door in the meantime?
No, not at all. But we have been having, good conversations. It's a new government. It's not surprising that those conversations need to take place.
And you pulled them into line?
No, not at all. We can never pull the government into line.
The Prime Minister diagnosed the problem correctly, and it's that people have lost confidence in business. People have seen BHS, they've seen Sports Direct, they've seen top pay spiralling out of control. I think there's a real danger that the Prime Minister and the government responds to vested interest in Britain's boardrooms, and what they lead to do is listen to ordinary working people, listen to the voters, and do the right thing, which is to put workers on board and drive through a real wholesale reform of corporate governance in this country.
140 days into her premiership, the Prime Minister is finding it hard to deliver policies that match the high-voltage rhetoric she feels matches the public mood.
Gary Gibbon. After the break, it's getting cold out there. Hard times for families who cannot afford to heat their homes. And keeping it in the family. How Donald Trump's influential son-in-law, Jared Kushner, could be in line for a key White House role. Welcome back. Donald Trump has been appointing more people to his top White House team, promising a busy day of meetings with more potential cabinet picks. But behind the scenes, members of his own family are among his most trusted advisors, including his daughter, Ivanka, and her husband, Jared Kushner. Thanks to his fierce political loyalty and key role in the victorious election campaign, he could be in line for an influential White House role, as Inigo Gilmore now reports.
Over at Trump Towers, the president-elect is in town, turning his hand from campaigning to building a presidential team. And all eyes are on his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, a political novice who was an architect of the campaign, now emerging as his key confidant.
Jared is a very successful real estate person, but I actually think he likes politics more than he likes real estate. I'm going to tell you.
But with the Trump White House already facing accusations of nepotism and conflicts of interest, the idea of giving a key role to his son-in-law, another political apprentice, is raising serious concerns.
Jared is perceived right now as a very, very powerful man in the land.
He's Trump's golden boy.
Yes.
Journalist and author Vicky Ward has known Jared Kushner and Donald Trump for many years.
Only one person tells Donald what to do, and that is Donald Trump. Bottom line. But I think after that, it is his children, certainly Ivanka. And Jared, I mean, I did actually speak to Donald Trump on Friday, and he told me how incredibly brilliant he thinks Jared is. He called him my son. Not even son-in-law, my son.
Close they might be, but federal anti-nepotism laws prevent presidents from employing family members, although there's speculation Trump is trying to find ways round this. We went to find Jared Kushner to ask him what his plans were. Walking to the office at 666 Fifth Avenue with his parents, he was offering no clues.
Mr. Kushner, do you think you're going to get a job in the White House?
Have a good day, thank you.
You're going to get a job in the White House, you think? Charles, do you think he's going to get a job in the White House?
The disarming smile gave nothing away. Jared Kushner is now inside his company headquarters with his parents for their regular Tuesday business meeting. Just like the Trumps, this is very much a family affair. It's all about loyalty and sticking together. Jared Kushner's fortune, like Trump's, comes from real estate. His company's headquarters are just across the road from his father-in-law's. Both families were outsiders to the Manhattan big time. The Kushners are from this small town in New Jersey. Jared's grandparents were Holocaust survivors. A local school proudly bears their name. But the family name was tarnished 12 years ago in a scandal involving Jared's father. Amid a family feud, he was sent to jail for tax evasion and witness tampering. He'd hired a prostitute for his brother-in-law and had him secretly filmed as he tried to stop him speaking to prosecutors. Just 24, Jared found himself running the family business and ambitiously then bought one of the city's newspapers.
I mean, it was a really big embarrassment when his father went to jail. Quite interestingly, he doubled down, and I think buying the New York Observer was part of that. So it said, not only am I not embarrassed to be a Kushner, I'm going to be a part of the establishment. He needed to rehabilitate the Kushner brand.
The man who prosecuted Jared Kushner's father, former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, was recently ousted from Trump's transition team. Amid claims of revenge, Jared insists he wasn't involved in any way. Revenge, though, is a familiar dish in New Jersey. Here at Holston's, where mobster Tony Soprano made his final appearance, feelings are mixed about the unfolding drama around Jared Kushner and whether he should follow Donald Trump into the White House.
I have no issue with him. I mean,
You don't think it's a conflict for you? It's not a conflict for you?
No, not at all. Not at all. I mean, he was instrumental in Trump's campaign and the election. You build success with a great team around you.
There's a perception of impropriety in that he won't be able to provide him with objective information. So you really need people who have no vested interest as a family member. You know, you need people who are not afraid to tell you, no.
I'm a newcomer to politics, but not to backing the Jewish state.
And it's over the fraught subject of Israel that Trump has increasingly sought advice from Jared. The president-elect raised eyebrows when he suggested his son-in-law could broker Middle East peace in an as-yet undefined role.
My colleagues have asked Trump about his Israel his Israel advisors. It's all people who are close to him. It's not the usual people from Washington think tanks or former ambassadors or the person who served as a diplomat in Jerusalem. It's his real estate lawyer, his son-in-law, and that's how Trump operated throughout the whole campaign.
The question now, if Trump pushes ahead and gives Jared or other relatives White House roles, will he face legal as well as political challenges?
Democrats are litigious, and they will bring cases. And the courts today are heavily Democratic. Remember that the last 8 years, Obama filled the courts with Democrats. So there are a lot of Democrats in the federal judiciary.
So things could get messy.
They could get messy.
Even if things do get messy, and regardless of whether his role is formal or not, there's no doubt Jared Kushner will be a powerful presence in the unpredictable world of President Donald Trump.
Inigo Gilmore reporting from the United States, and we're sorry we ran the wrong pictures when we trailed this report just before the break. Now, with temperatures tonight falling as low as -9, campaigners are warning that 4 million households in Britain are still struggling to afford heating, causing illness, anxiety, and affecting their chances throughout life. And they say the problem of fuel poverty will last for decades to come. Tom Clark is in Cambridgeshire. Tom.
Well, John, it's chilly here in the village of Maney in the Cambridgeshire Fens. It's about -5 now.
Earlier, we were out tinkering around with a thermal imaging camera that you can plug into your smartphone. And it just illustrated how, in villages like this, in fact, villages anywhere, detached houses particularly lose a lot of heat out to the environment on a cold night like this. And it illustrates the point that energy efficiency campaigns have been making for years, that we just don't do well enough here in Britain at keeping our old, ageing housing stock as energy efficient as it should be. Successive governments have failed to do so. And earlier we spoke to a gentleman in this village who lived in an entirely uninsulated house just across the road from here, has now moved into a much warmer bungalow behind me, but one that he still struggles to pay the heating bills for every month. Tonight will be the coldest night of the year so far, and nights here on the Cambridgeshire Fens can be colder than most. Just ask William Evans, now 84. He lived for 17 years in an uninsulated house here in the village of Mainey that he couldn't afford to heat.
It was literally a row of planks of wood and then a bit of cardboard.
And no insulation?
No insulation whatever. The winters were harsh. It was bitterly cold, bitterly damp. But as I approached 80, then problems set in. After 70, I went downhill fast. And I was ended up carted off to the local hospitals every winter for about 3 years running.
He's been in a warmer home for 5 years now, but Mr. Evans, Chief Petty Officer Evans, used to live in palaces. He was valet and head of retinue to Lord Mountbatten, then worked with the Duke of Westminster and Arab princes. He retired on a small pension, and even now in his double-glazed bungalow, the bill for his oil-fired central heating is a major expense.
Even now I can't fill my oil tank. Never. I wouldn't be able to afford the £700 to fill the oil tank. Some of these old dears here now sit in their chairs wrapped in their pyjamas things, then they've got their 3 or 4 dressing gowns on, then they've got their duvet covers, and they don't go out the door once the winter comes. It is sad. Real poverty is there.
Today, a new report from charity National Energy Action finds 9 million people across the UK are living in fuel poverty, in cold, damp and sometimes mouldy conditions. The charity highlights the danger of respiratory illnesses, especially for children, whose education and mental health also suffers. At the extreme, there are 9,000 extra deaths each year because of cold homes.
Energy bills have increased over the years and the poorest are paying more. They haven't been able to take advantage of market offerings. The government has cut the grants that it's made available for making homes cheaper to heat, and also we've seen a growth in the number of private rented properties where some of the worst housing can be found.
Theresa May highlighted the issue in her first conference speech as PM. Yet in this month's autumn statement, no mention of money for home energy efficiency, the only long-term solution to fuel poverty.
We know, for example, that in other countries which have much colder winter temperatures, they still have much less of a problem with cold homes. So we think it's time to learn from those countries to bring the housing stock for all of us up to an appropriate level of fuel efficiency.
In a statement, the government told us it was
committed to tackling fuel poverty.
It accepts that
the best long-term solution is to improve the energy efficiency of households,
and its reforms will make energy companies
insulate 1 million homes by 2020.
William Evans saw out many colder winters than this without complaining. But campaigners say on current rates of progress, the government won't meet its fuel poverty targets within 80 years. They're making a fuss now to prevent a lifetime of cold homes to come. Tom Clark, Channel 4 News in Cambridgeshire.
Now, the Liberal Democrats claim they're closing the gap on sitting MP Zac Goldsmith in the Richmond by-election. The former Conservative MP triggered the vote over his opposition to the government's Heathrow expansion plans. He's now standing as an independent. But are the Lib Dems really in with a chance? Our political correspondent Michael Crick has been to find out.
Richmond was meant to be the one-issue by-election, but with all 3 main candidates against Heathrow expansion, that's not really taken off. And Zac Goldsmith, whose resignation caused this contest, seems to have been flying below the media radar. Though we did find some of his team Some Tories, some not.
Don't belong to any party, but I'm campaigning for Zach.
So I see you've got a
it's
conservative, conservative clipboard there.
That's right. That's just a clipboard.
And is this conservative data that you're doing the canvassing? So it's all done from fresh.
To use it.
The Lib Dems were blown over here at the last election. But this could be their big comeback. For Sarah Olney, Brexit's the big issue, and 70% of Richmond voters are thought to have gone for Remain.
But if you can't win Richmond, I mean, it's been a Liberal area for 40 years. You're not going to win anywhere, are you? You might as well pack up and go and join the Greens or something.
You mean that would completely ignore all the fact that almost every by-election across the country where the Lib Dems are standing in local councils, and don't say that doesn't matter, because it does, we are winning by a landslide.
The Liberal Democrats now claim they're edging ahead here. And Zach Goldsmith, in an email yesterday, said it would be extremely close. Now, such claims may simply be spin, but if they're right, it represents a massive shift since last year, when Mr. Goldsmith got a majority of more than 23,000.
But this last week, Zach Goldsmith's eluded us, despite many emails and calls with his press officer.
And this is presumably designed as a high-profile by-election, yet you seem to be, in a strange way, not very interested in the high profile.
Labour's Christian Wolmar is fighting Lib Dem efforts to squeeze his party's vote and fighting to reverse Brexit.
The referendum was an advisory poll taken at a particular time with not very much understanding of what the details might be. Who knows, when the details are known, people will actually think about it. There's already a move in the country against Brexit, and 52-48 was very close.
One Labour member who signed Wolmar's nomination form today urged Labour voters tactically instead to back Sarah Olney, who holds similar views on Brexit.
But aren't fundamentally you trying to overthrow the decision of the British people made only a few months ago?
Well, in this constituency, people voted overwhelmingly to Remain, and I've been very clear in this campaign that if they select me, they will be selecting a very strongly pro-Remain MP.
Even though you accept the referendum results, so you said a few weeks ago?
Well, what I'm saying is I still really want Britain to remain in the European Union, and I will do whatever I can in my power as MP to do that.
Finally today, we learnt from Twitter that Zach Goldsmith had invited the public for a coffee morning at this pub.
You come for the meeting with Mr. Goldsmith?
Yes.
Are you a fan?
Yes, I've had quite a lot of dealings with him.
Oh, I just adore Zach.
Do you?
I do.
So he could say anything and you'd vote for him?
He could say anything, absolutely.
Really?
Yes.
What? Killing the firstborn and you'd vote for him?
I wouldn't care. Dogs no, children maybe.
Oh, I see. So you're pro-expansion?
I am.
So you're going to come and tell him that?
Yes.
Then a sighting.
You seem to be running scared.
Of who?
Of us.
I don't...
I mean, your press
No.
officer said you wouldn't do us an interview.
That's not true. I'm doing a public meeting now.
A public meeting? Great.
Sorry, sir.
This is a public meeting, isn't it?
It is a public meeting, yeah, but I'm afraid...
Even without our camera, I was barred. But not so the Daily Mail.
What was all so secret then?
Oh, it's very hot stuff.
Oh, really?
They wouldn't let you in there, old boy.
At last, we got his position on Brexit.
Shouldn't you, if you're reflecting your constituents, be campaigning for a soft Brexit and to stay in the single market?
Well, if you look at my record since the referendum, my interventions on this issue, you'll see that I have been a moderating influence.
So you're in favour of us staying in the single market, are you?
If you let me finish, I mean, my two interventions on this issue, my last act, in fact, as an MP, was to vote with Labour against the Conservatives on the issue of EU migrants, and before that I led the campaign in Parliament to get a reassurance from the Prime Minister that she would protect EU environmental rules and regulations, which are relevant actually in the context of the battle we're fighting here against Heathrow expansion.
Zach Goldsmith's put his seat at risk, but even if he wins, probably won't stop a new runway. He may have honoured his pledge, but that pledge was made long before Brexit came to dominate our politics.
Michael Crick reporting. And you can see a full list of the candidates who are standing on the screen now. 3 mainstream parties are not standing in the by-election. The Conservatives chose not to oppose their former MP, Zac Goldsmith. UKIP are also supporting Mr Goldsmith, while the Greens are backing the Lib Dems.
After the break, banned from entering a dance contest and told his wheelchair was damaging the floor. We meet the disabled dancer who is taking a company to court after he was turfed out of a jive contest in a West London hotel.
Welcome back. A keen amateur dancer is taking legal action after he was banned from an event and told his wheelchair would damage the dance floor. Fred Walden says he felt angry and embarrassed when he was stopped from taking part in a jive addiction contest in October. Fred Walden says dancing keeps him healthy and happy. In 15 years, he's travelled the country attending dance competitions, both watching and taking part.
You can walk along, keep walking.
But last October, when dancing at a hotel in Heathrow, he was asked to stop because the organisers said his wheels were damaging the special sprung dance floor they had brought along.
Pull you in this time and we go round.
Fred denies this, and he's suing the company Jive Addiction for discrimination, for treating him worse than able-bodied customers, and for not taking reasonable steps to prevent him being at a disadvantage.
We need to have businesses that know how to treat their disabled customers and make accommodations and adjustments for their disabled customers. Disabled people should be able to enjoy nightclubs, dance floors, pubs, bars, just like anyone else.
Jive Addiction couldn't be reached for a comment. But in its defence statement, it says it has a policy of preventing anyone with any object damaging their dance floor. The same applies to high heels as a wheelchair. Fred says the experience won't stop him dancing and that he's been made welcome almost everywhere he's danced. And Fred Walden is with me now. So, Fred, what was actually said to you?
I was stopped as I was just finishing the second dance and told I wasn't allowed to dance on the floor anymore, which I thought was somebody just having a joke. And then they said, no, we're not joking, it's serious. You damaged the floor. I was really confused. Because, you know, I'd just done a very fast dance with a champion dancer. And if there'd been anything wrong with my chair, we would have noticed. And there was nothing wrong. And I spent...
And apart from confusion, how did you feel in that moment?
Well, when then I realised what was going on, I was really angry. And I had to leave to calm myself down for a while. I went to the loo, splashed cold water on my face, did a bit of deep breathing, countdown. Then I went back to see what it was really about.
Now, the companies say that they would ask anyone, whether they're in a wheelchair or in stiletto heels or anything else, to stop dancing on this dance floor because it's not suitable.
That's nonsense. If you go on their own website, the Jive Addiction website, and the related photographer they pay, you'll see lots of pictures of people on their dance floor wearing stilettos, sitting on the dance floor on metal-legged chairs, metal tables, people sitting on the floor with jeans on, with metal studs on them. They do not properly enforce this rule.
You're very clear that you feel this was targeted at you because you're in a wheelchair?
Absolutely. This chair is a special chair. It's a super light, custom-built chair that I've had further adapted. I hire an engineer to maintain it regularly, has special German tyres with a rubber compound that doesn't mark, and I look after it.
Now, you were a keen dancer before your accident. How difficult was it to then transition to dancing in a wheelchair?
Once I was paralysed, I was convinced my dancing life was over. And then after a sort of little drink at a Christmas party, I danced with somebody who did Ciroc, and they sort of coaxed me along for a lesson. And the teacher was very accommodating, did a special lesson that I could do. And then I gradually built up the moves and skills. It was hard. I left a few times, and really good people dragged me back.
And you feel it's quite important for a disabled person to dance with someone who's able-bodied. Why is that?
Not really, but for me it is, because that's what I did before. And just because now I use a wheelchair, I'm not a different person. I'm the same person.
But do you feel that it sort of integrates people together for you
I
personally?
think it's a good thing for everybody, and people, able-bodied people at these events often come up to me and tell me I've inspired them, especially beginners, because they're struggling to learn the moves. They're a bit nervous, and they see me dance and think, wow, this guy can do it in a chair, so I'll be able to do it. And that's a good thing, and it's been a great feeling, and people have been wonderful. This is an exception.
Fred, thank you so much for coming in. John.
Tonight's main news, 20,000 people have managed to escape the Syrian city of Aleppo as government forces and their allies continue their drive to recapture rebel territory. Fresh airstrikes left at least 20 civilians dead as they fled the government advance. Residents in the city say thousands of people are now cramming into alleyways and deserted buildings to try to escape the fighting. One sartorial note you will take that on this chilly night, autumnal colours all round, even including my own tie. That's it from us tonight. Back again at 7 tomorrow. That's Channel 4 News. Good evening.